Hello, hello, hello. This is Adrienne Bergen. This is The Ageless Traveler. And this is what we call a bonus episode because it's the companion episode to our podcastathon on good grief. It's the leading organization for child grief. But in doing that, it also supports the parents, the grandparents, the family. And so this is a very special bonus episode with Brandon Hermes, who's gone through this with good grief. He is the father of 3 kids. He lost his wife in the midst of her life. And we want you to hear what he has to say. It's so important for those of you who are going through something like this. They know someone who's going through this. Heard all about the organization Good Grief. You've heard about what it means to be a volunteer, and that's so inspirational. And you've heard a little bit about my story. But there's another story to be told. And that's the story of somebody who is really currently participating with the protocols at Good Grief. And I think when you hear what Brandon Hermes has to say, it will demystify this protocol they have. Because we're all thinking, if we have grief, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing anyone can do about it. In fact, you are told if someone has lost a loved one, just sit near them. Don't do anything. Don't say anything. Just be there. That's how mysterious help is. But when you hear someone who's being helped, who's in the course of the protocol over at Good Grief right now, what it means to him, you get more of a feeling that something can be done. So thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing your story with us.
My pleasure.
All right, now let's start with that story. Tell us how many kids you have and when your wife passed first.
So I have 3 children. I have a 17-year-old daughter. I have a 14-year-old son, and I have a 10-year-old daughter. And my wife passed away on March 18th of 2024. So each of them were 2 years younger than what I just stated when my wife originally died.
And was it an illness or how did that happen?
It was all pretty sudden, actually. So she died on March 18th of 2024, and on January 14th of 2024, finally, after a week of kind of some little things happening that I noticed different in her life, I pushed her to please go to the emergency room and get checked out. And after a couple of days of fighting me, she finally did. Yep. And then even while she was there, wanted to leave after they said everything was okay. And I told her to press on because there was no way everything was okay. She finally got a scan and was immediately diagnosed with glioblastoma, which the layperson would know as brain cancer. She had some pretty aggressive tumors. So within the span of 2 months, she was diagnosed and had 3 different brain surgeries and passed away right about 2 months after she was diagnosed.
And how old was she?
At the time, she was 45 years old.
Then this is really what Ambrose Bierce said, in the midst of life. She was really in the midst of life. And so were the kids.
Absolutely.
And with the age groups you gave us, they each needed her in very different ways. How did you find Good Grief?
Sort of right away, I have a very big network of friends. I'm blessed in that way. And several family members and friends who knew what my wife, Deb, was going through reached out and told me, about Good Grief. One of the things that I knew very quickly after my wife died was that my charge and my responsibility had shifted from my professional life to my personal family life. Not that I wasn't heavily invested in that already. But the percentages increased to a much higher percentage of wanting to make sure that my kids were going to be okay. Of course, I wanted to be okay as well. I was probably a whole lot worse off than the children were. But that's not what it feels like. You feel like you're carrying your grief and that subsequently you're going to be carrying the grief of 3 other people as well. So, yeah, it was recommended by some friends and family, and I latched on fairly quickly.
One of the things that the surviving parent always says is that Good Grief allows them to feel their grief.
I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve anyway. So the concept of exposing my emotions, talking about what I was feeling, not only with the kids, but also putting pen to paper and putting myself out into the world out of a great fear of loneliness, that there was an immediate understanding of how this was going to be handled amongst the kids. Keep in mind that in that very brief 2 months, I had to sit down with my children and tell them that their mother was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to have, and those were three separate conversations because of the varying ages of my children. Those conversations sound very different. And then, three separate conversations with the children that their mother indeed had died. And so these were very unfortunate launching platforms for how we were going to communicate about what life is now and what life looks like in the future. And I think the most important thing in navigating our grief is how we were going to talk about mom,
Yes.
how we were going to keep her present in our daily lives, not through a broad explanation, but through daily crying in the kitchen and saying, I miss her so much, and, things like that, and bringing up old memories that used to be super painful that are now, they sting a little bit less. We can smile and laugh a little bit about those memories. But no, I recognized I had been through a couple of, little things in my life, no major grief experiences, but just some things that let me know through reading, especially through philosophy, Eastern philosophy, about pushing things through so they don't get stuck inside of you. I knew that we needed to expose those things as they were hurting us and find a way to talk about them, even if it was just me talking and the kids listening, But yeah, that was the general, boilerplate for what this journey was going to look like. Good Grief came in, and I was like, of course we would want to get people who also have been through what we've been through, because while our individual stories are unique, people die of cancer every single day.
Okay. And the other thing too is when you're talking to each other is one thing. When you're saying the same things to other people who are experiencing the same thing, that makes such a difference as well. Now, how is it working? Good Grief does separate by age. I was a volunteer there for 5 years, and I had each age group except the adults. So I did have the teens, I did have the mid-level and little ones. Have they separated the kids into 3 different age groups, which would be typical?
Yeah, when we first arrived, my 3 children were in 3 separate age groups. My daughter being in the oldest, quote unquote, teen group. My son was in like the tween group at that time. And then my daughter, she was 8 years old. So I don't know what they call that group. But yeah, they were in 3 separate groups.
One of the things that I experienced there was what you said, which is they find ways to articulate their feelings about the mother, the father, the lost one, and bring things home. One of the things I liked was making plates for the holiday so that you could actually have a space for the person that you lost. Is that some of the things that your kids have come home with? Because there tends to be some arts and crafts involved with Good Grief.
Yeah, the youngers did more crafts. I think the teens, it was like more kind of like play focused and music and kind of what's cool. And I don't know if that's exactly the best way to describe it.
We played pool. We actually played pool.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of like a hangout room, right? Versus, the younger kids who, subsequently, my daughter's in art therapy as well because of this very simple way to take something and then also apply it to what we're feeling at the same time. So yeah, they definitely incorporate that, and it's super positive. Always walked away from the crafty nights feeling super positive about what had transpired for my youngest specifically.
Now let's talk about you for a minute. One of the volunteers for the parents said it was some of the most moving things that I had ever heard about how you support each other, sometimes just by silence, and sometimes with very practical things. What happens in that room?
Yeah, it's a pretty, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it's a pretty magical place. I think it's rare you can walk into a room and in any facet of your life and have every kind of feel the same exact way about what's transpired. In my room specifically, every participant had lost their spouse. There's no one in my room who lost their mother or grandmother or something like that. Never playing the grief comparison game, but people who've lost a spouse specifically, it's a very sort of specific kind of thing. And what transpires in our room, we do a beautiful calming where we, light a candle and take 5 deep breaths, I think to create a little baseline. And then we usually open up with, a positive thing that's happened in the past week or two, and then how we're feeling in that moment. And then the facilitators, they have a plan. In my room, we deviate from the plan sometimes. My facilitators specifically, who I love dearly and have been, facilitators in my room for a couple of years, they really ride the vibe of the room. And we have all become very close, all of us who have lost our spouses. And so what transpires is usually there's a person or two who might be going through a little bit more that day or that week or 2 weeks or month or whatever it is. Maybe it was the month that their person died. Maybe it's Mother's Day or Father's Day. Maybe it's their anniversary. And we tend to, mostly unbeknownst to us, lean into what the person who's feeling the heaviest is going through. And like you say, sometimes we sit in silence after they speak for 15 seconds. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but that's a lot when someone has poured something out there. And then if it feels right, while we don't give advice, we definitely offer words of support and comfort and sometimes humor and laughter to help the others through. And it really is a beautiful give and take that happens in that room for sure.
So for you, a Good Grief is a wonderful organization. It's done so much, but it's difficult for people to realize that it's not only for the kids.
Yeah.
It is also for the adults, but then it's also for the kids around the kids, because when they go back to school, they're honestly a happier person, all their friends, and then for their own future. More kids who've lost parents early in life don't end up even finishing high school. Even ones with means, statistically, than others. They also do more damage. There's more criminality, even ones that had the means. But it's all this handling of grief that makes a difference between how you fly and how you fail. So this has a lot of legs, and I want people, because I'm asking people to make a donation to understand how wide this is. So for you personally, what difference has it made for you? First you, and then what you observe with the kids.
For me, it's made all the difference in the world. I am a person who in other parts of my life who believes that relatable experiences provide comfort. If you're the first person to ever, when I was a young man, I drove across the country. I quit my job and I said, I want to go do this thing. And I was having what I believe was a nervous breakdown until I talked to a friend who had done it and told me, I went through the same thing. And that immediately brought me down a few levels in my anxiety and helped me, because I had someone who was relating to how I was feeling. And I believe that's a common thread in feeling a little bit better. I think when you feel alone, that you're the only person on this planet going through this thing and nobody can understand, that finding people who can understand is a great value. And, that's what it's meant to me. Is it put me in a room with these people and we created a mini community of understanding, of empathy and sympathy and all the things that I think we need as human beings in general. And then for the kids, what it did for me was, and for them, was created a baseline for how we're going to handle challenges our entire lives. There's no finish line in anything. It's just life. Today is how we're feeling today, and tomorrow is how we're feeling tomorrow. But if I can let them understand that when we're feeling something, or we're hurting, or even if we're experiencing great joy in life, that there are places to go and talk to people about those things. Sometimes it's as easy as friendships, and sometimes it's not. Again, I have a huge support system, and I have felt incredibly supported throughout this entire journey, this grief journey that I've been on. But instead of having it hurt, we've learned how to walk alongside of our grief and hold its hand. Beautiful words said by Stephen Colbert on Anderson Cooper's podcast was just really helpful to me. First heard it when my father died and tried to understand what that meant. And until my wife died, I didn't understand what that meant. And certainly in the first year, I was still trying to understand what that meant, but it slowly started to expose itself. And so Good Grief has just made this hand holding, something that's understandable. Here are a bunch of other people who are all trying to do the same thing. Again, people lose people every day, whether it's a wife or a husband or a father or a son, God forbid. All of these super complicated things, and Good Grief gives us an understanding, gave me a very specific understanding that others are feeling like I'm feeling.
And what is important to me here too is that this is a study. This is a discipline that Good Grief knows. It knows how to help people in grief. It's been proving it year after year, session after session. So this is for me to my listeners now. We're going to have my 55th anniversary, and a lot of my listeners have long-term relationships, really long-term relationships. And when we think about travel here at the Ageless Traveler, they often think about their usual travel as a couple. They're getting to the age now as we are. What happens when we're not a couple anymore? What is life going to be like? Now, yesterday, my husband and I went to see The King and I, which we hadn't seen since we were 8 years old or something like that. Everybody's enjoying this wonderful old musical, and we're sitting there crying. This is our childhood. This is our nostalgia. When you lose the person that you have such a deep shared experience with after so many years, and there is any forum to meet with new people that also you're sharing experience with, it bridges a gap that cannot be bridged in any other way, even though they are strangers at first. The ability to share an experience with people who've had the same experience, not talk about it, tell about it, not even listen to it, but share it, makes all the difference in the world. And that's really not only what Good Grief does, but it's able to teach other people how to do it. And that's very, very important. What you said is exactly on point. And it's very difficult to explain. If I said to somebody, well, we're going to cure cancer, boom, very, very easy. Yes, we all want that. But what this is about is such a human element. Now, I'm very interested in one last thing here that no one's talked about on our show. And that is leaving Good Grief. People do leave Good Grief. A time comes when they feel it's okay. So how have you thought about that?
Well, that's a great question. I've thought about that a lot. I am going to come back for one more year. I haven't specifically gotten answers from my two teenagers, but I believe they probably won't be back, mostly just because they have spring sports for their high school, and it does interfere with that. But my youngest, I believe, is still interested. So I'm thinking about just the two of us going back this year. But much like yourself, I care so much for this organization that I've done some small things outside of the doors and would like to one day be in a place where I could go and pay it forward to others as a facilitator one day. I don't think I'm quite ready for that yet. I think if I'm crying more than the
people there, right,
that might not be the best. But having been through a few sessions, and the fact that my kids are slightly older than some of the other people who are in my group, who have younger kids, who probably feel like they're there more for them now than they are for themselves. They've put the oxygen mask on themselves, and they're continuing now to hold it onto the faces of their children. I believe they might be there a little bit longer, even though maybe internally they don't believe that they need to be there. But if their kids are going to be there, then why not be in the room? And then in some capacity are also serving like facilitators. So I feel like I'm close to the transitioning out probably after this year, then taking a few years for myself, and then possibly coming back in a facilitator capacity, which I would love to do, because those first months and weeks and even years are complicated. And I believe that having some kind of a perspective and being able to emotionally hold the hand of people walking through that journey is something that I feel almost required to do after what's been done for me, by Good Grief.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing this with us. I had said to you before we got on together that I had the privilege of being on the Jerry Lewis telethon a couple of times because I was a lawyer. What I was actually telling people was that everything they gave was tax deductible. That was my role.
Right.
But every time I would go on, they would have some of the bars from that song, When You Walk Through a Storm. And everyone would be weeping and everyone would be in tears. But the line that always stayed with me was, hold your head up high. It's the hardest thing to do. But really, Good Grief helps you do it. So as I close out this show, I have told you a lot about how you can donate. It's very easy. Take a look at our show notes. You will see how to text. You will see the link for giving money online. You will see that if you give $35 or more, you'll get a free copy of my latest book, The Retirement Income Explosion. So you'll have all the money you need in the world to travel. But here you're hearing from somebody who is positioning himself and his thinking in the future of maybe being a volunteer. So if that's possible for you, and there are a couple of online volunteer experiences you can have with Good Grief, in addition to the ones that are right there in the great state of New Jersey, please think of that as well. And you know what I'm going to say? Never stop traveling.